This is what we find shocking in contemporary Russia and in Vladimir Putin, that he talks like a 1920 geopolitical thinker about living space. This is very outdated. It will not work. It won't be successful, but it's also extraordinarily destructive.
Dzień dobry Państwu. Sebastian Stodolak, to nasze rozmowy w świetlicy wolności. Prehistoryczny człowiek walczył, jak wiemy dobrze, z filmów. Oczywiście trochę żartuję, o ogień. Potem po rewolucji neolitycznej ludzie zaczęli walczyć o ziemię. Potem z kolei o kapitał. A o co walczą dzisiaj? Co jest tym złotem współczesności? Bo ropa już chyba nie. Odpowiedź na to pytanie stara się przedstawić w swojej książce Bruno Maçães. Książka wygląda tak, wydaliśmy ją w Warsaw Enterprise Institute i nosi tytuł Twórcy świata. Technologia i nowa geopolityka. Więc każdy, kto chce zrozumieć, na czym polega mechanizm geopolityczny łączący nowe technologie z władzą, powinien sięgnąć po tę książkę. Ona już jest w sprzedaży, zachęcam. A autor jest z nami zdalnie, co prawda w świetlicy, ale jednak i dzisiaj z nim porozmawiamy. Hello Bruno, how are you doing?
Very good. Great to talk to you.
Great to have you with us, even though remotely. I'd like to start with the title of your book. What does it mean these days to build a world? Because you write about world builders.
Yes. So, my argument is that great powers, superpowers, if you want to call them, what distinguishes them is the ability to build the world that everyone else has to inhabit. The idea for the book actually started many years ago when I was living in China and traveling a lot to Washington. So I saw the beginning of the new Cold War around 2018. And I was hearing in Washington think tanks a lot the idea that if we are not careful, if we Americans are not careful, we will be living in a Chinese world. And that got me thinking, what does it mean to live in a Chinese world? I thought the world was natural, physical, not Chinese. And if we could be living in a Chinese world, does it mean that we are now living in an American world? So I tried to develop a theory that geopolitical power is about this ability to build the world. The worlds we inhabit are increasingly virtual. And it's not a process of the last few decades, it's a process of the last few centuries, as I explain in the book. So the ability to build the world has been increasing. And geopolitical power is about this ability. It's about the ability to build increasingly virtual worlds, like, let us say, in the Matrix movie. And then everyone else is captured inside the worlds that have been built by the United States, by China, by other world builders in the future.
But, it begs a question, how plastic is reality? Because you claim that the structures of the world that we are living in are designed, not purely natural, but designed. And for example, pandemic proved that they can be redesigned overnight.
Yes.
But, on the other hand, there is a very strong and long tradition warning against understanding the world as like totally flexible and susceptible to human design. This tradition comes from Hayek, from Oakeshott. So they claim societies contain emergent orders that nobody planned, but everybody depends on. So how do you reconcile those two worldviews?
I'm actually very influenced by Hayek and Oakeshott. When I started studying political philosophy 30 years ago, they were authors I liked very much. I'm not sure they contradict what I just said. Particularly Hayek is very interested in our idea to shape the world. The point that he makes is that we shape at the level of, let us call it infrastructure, the system, the basic rules, the basic structure. It is not possible to shape it at the level of detail. And that's an argument I make in the book. These world builders, they are not interfering with the detail. They provide, let us say, the operating system. The basic rules, the way the system works, but then the detail is filled in later. Or is in a video game, you have the basic architecture of the video game, but a lot of the game is actually filled in by the player himself or herself. So I'm not following Hayek or Oakeshott in this book, but I don't think the contradiction is as serious as one might think at first. I think the pandemic revealed disability. What shocked me in the pandemic, I talk a bit about it looking back to my experiences. What shocked me about the pandemic was not so much the fact that a pandemic happened. We all knew it was going to happen. It was the ability our societies had to reshape social economic reality very quickly and very deeply. And in fact, it was a kind of a moment of crisis, but also a moment of learning. And I don't think politics has been the same, because from that moment on, we realized that our powers to shape reality were much, much larger, and that we could shape it and reshape it without causing chaos. Supply chains didn't completely break down. But I think maybe we'll talk about that later. I think there is a counter argument to my book uh, that I'm thinking about, which is the Iran war and the importance of geography, the importance of the Strait of Hormuz. So we can talk about that and about my response to that. But I think it's a serious objection that you could make because we seem to see a return of physical
Physical
power.
world limits our ability to change the reality, right?
Yes, but this is how I think about the Strait of Hormuz question. Great powers, they have to shape reality. They have to create these artificial worlds. And what we see in the case of the United States and Iran is that the United States is being captured by physical reality. But that to me shows a growing American inability to create new worlds, this inability of world building that I talk about. Once the United States is not able to create global systems, is not able to preserve the global economic and trade system as it used to exist, once the United States is not able to incorporate other countries into the American system, not able to incorporate Russia, not able to incorporate China, not able to incorporate Iran, maybe not able to incorporate India. Of course, we can blame these countries for it, although I don't think it's a very intelligent reaction to blame. It is the United States was extremely capable after World War II to incorporate other countries into its system, even Germany, even Japan. That ability has been collapsing. But that to me shows that we are returning to physical reality. But physical reality is not a source of power, is increasingly a source of conflict. If the United States wants to remain the superpower, it has to rise above geography again. Or then maybe other countries, potentially China, will be able to do that. So I don't say that geography is unimportant. I say that geopolitical power comes from the ability to overcome geography. And over the past 20, 30, 40 years, the United States was very able to do that to the point where we almost forgot about geography. But that was a sign of American power. And what we're seeing now is a sign of that power eroding, diminishing.
hmm That's true. You've been talking about operating system
Right.
of the world that is designed by those superpowers. Can you please tell us a bit more about what systems are we operating on these days?
So I do what I do in the book that I think is interesting and new, if I can say that, is that I use a lot of language from computer science when talking about geopolitics, and I
By the way,
increasingly
are you a computer scientist as
no,
well?
no. As a young person, I was very much into coding, and I guess that stays with you. But so I do think a little bit in those terms. But increasingly, to me, it seems that language is more useful than the language of geography, for example, or that the language of sociology, because we're talking about systems that are almost like computer code. And now we talk a little bit about what that means. And geopolitical power is the ability to build them, but also to change them, potentially to hack them in some ways. So that's how I talk, and I use this language over and over again. I even talk about it, God mode, which is the ability to have full control over a system as the highest form of geopolitical power. What are those systems? They are systems of trade, they are systems of currency, they are systems of energy, uh, they are systems of values, norms, and ideas, and these are well integrated. If we look back, we have both to look back at how successful America has been at doing this, and then it is less successful today. And then we look at China as trying to create a Chinese system that is, in many respects, similar to the American one because it operates again on the basis of trade, on the basis of technology, on the basis of standards, technological standards, increasingly on the basis of currency. But for example, what the United States did in the 70s by integrating energy and currency, you had two separate elements, the dollar and the hydrocarbon molecules. And the United States created a virtual entity, completely virtual, the petrodollar, which is, it's a concept that is made of two parts, the hydrocarbon and the currency, creating an increasingly virtual but very powerful system, the petrodollar. It's about capturing the surplus that the oil producing countries have, creating a global dollar system that every other country relies on. For American power, this was a brilliant invention. It allows the US to have higher deficits than everyone else. It gives the US a very powerful weapon with economic financial sanctions. It is quite extraordinary. Now, what we're talking about today is whether the global system is starting to fracture as a result of some misguided choices, but also as a result of profound changes in the global economy, particularly the rise of China as the main industrial powerhouse and also increasingly technological powerhouse. But what I argue in the book is that the main source of power is ultimately technology. The reader will see that in my book, and there's a little bit of a pun in the title because I say technology and the new geopolitics, but in fact, technology and geopolitics in the book mean the same. Technology is about geopolitics, and geopolitics is about technology. Because if geopolitical power is about building the world, technology is what enables you to build the world. And so the two concepts start to come together and to converge in my book. And by the end of the book, I no longer distinguish between what is technology, what is geopolitics. They become the same.
So it's kind of far from the origins of the concept of geopolitics, because the origins of the concept are very physical.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. This is what I do in the book. I turn it around. This is why I call it New Geopolitics in the title, because it's a new kind of geopolitics.
Technopolitics. It's technopolitics.
Yes, you're entirely correct. The meaning was purely physical in the 1920s, but that meaning was very discredited. This is the concept of geopolitics that was then used by the Nazis with the idea of living space, living geography, which almost compared peoples to animal species that needed their own biological space. This ended up being a concept that was very, very discredited. And by the 50s, we had abandoned the concept. And you see that our universities, we don't have courses on geopolitics, we have courses of international relations. So the concept was replaced. What I now argue is that it's returning, but it's returning in a completely different form. It's returning, I repeat in the book that geopolitics used to be about the struggle to control territory, and now it's about the struggle to create the territory, create the virtual territory. Increasingly, even the battlefield itself is virtual. And those that are behind the scenes, controlling this shape of a virtual territory, are really the source of power.
So we've got right now the world that is, I would say, going into fragmentation when it comes to the virtual space. Russia, due to the war, basically cut itself off of the global World Wide Web. Chinese basically designed their internet to be cut off from the World Wide Web. Now European Union speaks a lot about technological sovereignty. At the beginning, internet was supposed to be connecting all the people all over the world. It was to be a flagship of globalization. Right now, as you suggest, this virtual space becomes a space where empires clash, actually.
Yes. Absolutely. The new Cold War between China and the United States is very different from the first Cold War because it's happening at this virtual space. And I think actually China has realized this very well. China is completely focused on developing the technologies of the future. Russia is the example of a country that, because it can't be successful at this struggle, it tried to return to the old concept of geopolitics. By the way, this is what we find shocking in contemporary Russia and in Vladimir Putin, that he talks like a 1920 geopolitical thinker about living space. This is very outdated. It will not work. It won't be successful, but it's also extraordinarily destructive, because the idea is to destroy the artificial worlds we built and return to a bit of law of the jungle, almost animal. You know that Vladimir Putin likes many of these authors from the 20s. Not so much the German ones, although a little bit, but the Russian ones that continue that tradition. In fact, Lev Gumilev seems to be Vladimir Putin's favorite writer. He turned the concept of geopolitics even into more biological, more physical. He's the one who talks about peoples as animal species. And Vladimir Putin is trying to recover that, but it can't work. And what we see, in fact, in Ukraine is that this old concept of geopolitics is failing. And in large measure is failing because Ukraine has developed and has used very advanced technologies, systems of artificial intelligence, of visual recognition, of drone technology, in a way that Russia was not prepared.
It's amazing when you watch the videos from the front that Ukrainian army publishes, when you have like 10 people in combat and 20 people in the operational room, when you have all those screens, live transmission from the front, and actually they're advising the combat team what to do, where to go, how to hide, where to shoot. That's amazing, actually.
That's quite amazing. And by the way, the first year of the war, my book came in 2025, but I was already talking a bit about the ideas the 2 years before and publishing some articles. And people always told me the Ukraine war is the refutation of your book, because the Ukraine war is all about artillery, who has the heaviest artillery. This was the first year where we were talking about the HIMARS question and the need for shells and so on. But by now, I think the Ukraine war actually fits very well with arguing in the book. You're completely correct. I've been so struck by these videos. First of all, it all looks a bit like a video game.
Yeah.
Which is both so exciting but also terrifying. And second, as you say, the front has become less and less important. The front is the place where you go to die. And in fact, if you're in the front, you won't survive. It's extraordinary. You won't survive more than a few hours. It's impossible not to be detected, and it's impossible not to be destroyed. These first-person drones, where someone seems to be playing a video game far away from the front, and it's these capacities that decide the outcome. So the war has become highly technological and has become highly virtual. Not to talk about what is quite important, which is even farther away from the front. Systems like Palantir, but there are also Ukrainian systems that are using artificial intelligence at a level that we still don't fully understand.
You mentioned Palantir. Let's stick to it for a while. It became a big thing recently when they published a manifesto claiming that these days, actually, this manifesto kind of confirms your vision of the world, because it says we have AI, and the AI is the new nuclear power. Right. So we Americans, we need to harness this power to our benefit. So all the engineers of Silicon Valley have to have this awareness that they serve our country and must serve our country. So yeah, artificial intelligence, large language models, how important are those things to our world? Is it, some people say it's a hype. It's a hype. You know, we are getting excited because we see the text generated out of thin air, which is smarter than the text that we would have generated, for example. Oh, amazing, miracle, but it's a hype. What is your take on this?
There are some elements of hype, but clearly what is happening is very important, and will change everything. I just think that people are still not fully understanding what AI is about. Let me give you an example. We used to talk about AI in terms of, on the one hand, human intelligence, on the other hand, artificial intelligence, and that was the contrast. And AI was supposed to be a super intelligence. But if you see about how AI is talked today, the contrast is not between AI and human intelligence. The contrast is a lot between AI and reality. If you go to social media, what people are asking when they say, is this AI? They mean, is this fake or is this real? So the contrast has shifted in a very strange way. You don't ask, is this human or AI? You ask, is this AI or is this real? So I think AI is fundamentally not about creating a super intelligence, but about creating virtual worlds. So
Yeah.
it is the last stage of this race towards the virtual. And this obviously will change the battlefield, will become almost entirely virtual. It is very disturbing and terrifying because even the idea of time will become virtual. Human beings live in time, but AI doesn't live in time. What we're already seeing is the disappearance of time. In the Ukraine battlefield, what is extraordinary is that everything takes place at a superhuman speed. I'm told by the people at Palantir that they are working in Ukraine. I'm told that now the time between recognizing a target and prosecuting or destroying that target is down to 2 or 3 minutes. In the Gulf War in 1993, where some of this technology was already available, the time was sometimes 6, 8 hours. But if we're talking about 2, 3 minutes, this is what Russia has not been able to do.
Or even less if we think of Lavender, this Israeli system, quite controversial one, by the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, the soldiers, I think I read an article in The Guardian that the soldiers that were operating the system were not actively involved into
Right.
verifying whether Lavender is giving them the right targets or not. They were just pressing enter all the time.
That's right.
Within the matter of 20, 30 seconds.
Extraordinarily efficient. We can talk, for example, about the case of Venezuela, where we have evidence that Palantir and Anthropic were used to capture Nicolas Maduro. But in the case of Taiwan, if there is a war in Taiwan, all likelihood is that it will be an entirely AI war, and speed will almost entirely collapse. The problem with this acceleration of time is that we lose control over the process. If we look at the Iran war, which is in many respects quite disturbing, the way it's been mismanaged, but at the very least, there is time to slow down, there is time to negotiate, there is time to rethink. But in a war led by AI, it will take place. The whole thing will take place in minutes. Targets can now be destroyed in a question of minutes. There is no time to reconsider, to recalibrate, to negotiate, to stop, to have a truce of some kind. And so human beings are no longer in charge of the process, and it can escalate in ways that are completely unpredictable and uncontrollable. This, for me, is the greatest danger of AI in war.
So you think that it's going to spiral into the reality where basically one country will have its own AI, the other will have its own AI, and when they go to war, they will just release the Kraken, their own AIs to clash, and they will just observe? The generals will just observe, let's look what our AI is doing. Is it winning? Oh, yes, it's winning. Great. Oh, we're losing. Oh, my God. We'll be like, we watch the game of AIs. That's
how it's going to be. And in many respects, it's already like that. As you say, in Gaza, it was already like that. Humans were outside the loop. Increasingly, they will have to be outside the loop because they are only noise. There's a sentence I quote in the book from my visit to Palantir in London, where a Palantir engineer says, this is not a domain where a human being can operate, or this is not a domain where a human being can exist in, the domain of decisions. I think he was talking about how if you have a lot of signals intelligence, recordings of phone conversations, and you have a lot of satellite imagery, you have to correlate the two. At some point, some general is talking about something that you can see in the satellite imagery. But how do you correlate all the intelligence that comes from signals, conversations, and all the intelligence that comes from photos? AI can do this automatically. Human beings would have to spend many months trying to test. Okay, they talking about a new missile system here in the conversation. Now let's look at all the photos and try to see where that new missile system is. To correlate different kinds of intelligence, AI can do automatically. And so the engineer told me this kind of activity is not a domain where a human being can operate.
And this is a very important point because, back in the day when we read the science fiction authors, they would create those dystopian visions in which AI gains self-awareness and tries to destroy the mankind because it deems mankind to be, I don't know, bad for the planet, for example. Okay, but these visions, when you compare them to the real AI, are totally out of touch. We don't need self-aware AI to kind of be dangerous, right? So it's a matter rather of not of self-awareness, it's a matter of efficiency.
Right. And I think you're also getting to a point that I think is very important, that I increasingly don't think about AI as an agent or a consciousness or a will. I think of AI as a virtual world, as I said. And if you think about AI as a virtual world, the question is, who built this world? There are always human beings behind. By the way, I'm talking about human beings that are not in control of the process, but there is another set of human beings, the human beings that design the AI, that are in control of the process, not the human beings operated. So you create a world, and then the world functions according to your initial instructions. And the result is that sometimes we may be deceived into thinking that AI is the danger, but I think the role of intellectuals and writers is to point out that there's a human being behind the curtain. Don't get distracted by the show, by the theater play.
There's always somebody pulling the strings.
Yes, there's always a playwright. You're watching a theater play, but there's always a playwright that wrote it. And maybe things get a little out of control in terms of going beyond what the playwright had expected, but still, he's there. There's a famous line in Dune, the novel, Frank Herbert, and it's not in the movie, but that's the novel that was used for the famous movie. And the line goes something like that human beings creating thinking machines in order to control other human beings. The danger is not so much the thinking machines, it's the human beings that created them. Obviously, this is a very important question today, but it's also a very geopolitical question, because these thinking machines will be controlled either by people in America or people in China. Clearly, it seems that Europe has lost this race. But I don't want to give the impression that it's only about war, because it's also about the economy.
Nie ma darmowych lunchy i nie ma darmowych podcastów. Można by uzupełnić słynne powiedzenie Miltona Friedmana. Proszę Państwa, w tym roku na naszych kanałach YouTube ukazuje się znacznie więcej treści. W związku z powyższym postanowiliśmy poprosić Was o wsparcie za pośrednictwem serwisu Patronite. Jeśli cenicie to, co publikujemy, zachęcam serdecznie do przekazania wsparcia.
Let me remind our viewers that we are talking with the author of this book, with Bruno Maçães. So yeah, pay attention to this book because it's kind of a novelty when it comes to thinking of our current modern world. Okay, coming back to what we are discussing, economy. Yeah. So you use the word metaverse in your book. How do you understand it? We all have in mind. Mark Zuckerberg's attempts to create metaverse, failed attempts. So do you think what is it in your mind, this concept? What does it mean?
3 or 4 years ago, metaverse appeared as an idea connected to virtual reality headsets. I don't think people were too excited about this. There was a lot of suspicion of these ideas. Then they were rebranded. In many respects, AI and large language models was a way of rebranding virtual reality. But very quickly, we are back talking about virtual reality. Even large language models, at this point, they seem to be used more and more to create videos.
But not in a sense that we are going to use those big glasses and have our own avatars and meet virtually with our coworkers. That was quite a naive understanding of metaverse, I would say.
That's right, because virtual reality is not that. What we have in our information space is much more virtual than having a headset. We do, in fact, live inside virtual spaces, but they don't take the form of a headset. They are much more powerful and they're much more basic. They are a basic infrastructure. But today, already on social media, the levels of disinformation, but also of fantasy, the way fake videos have taken over completely social media, to the point where I read the other day more than half the videos that circulate now are fake. Sometimes they're obviously fake. They can be used for politics, and they're being used for politics, but the impact is even greater. We now have, for example, all these videos that everyone loves about animals on the internet, they are now all entirely fake. But they are shaping the understandings and the minds of the new generation. So your relation to the world is going to be completely different. People won't even think about animals the same way because they were brought up in videos that portray animals as completely human, for example. This is almost like being brought up inside a movie, inside a Disney movie. So the impact is enormous. The way children are now, from a very early age, interacting with large language models, asking questions about their own lives and what it means to be a friend. Should I do this to my friend or not? You don't ask your parents, you ask a large language model. Without being fully aware that these large language models are, in fact, ideological in the sense that they incorporate visions of the world. Let me give you an example. The Swedish Prime Minister said about a year ago that when he's thinking about economic policy, he likes to discuss it with ChatGPT. And I thought this was very interesting. First, it's quite, if I was his finance minister or economy minister, I would be very disappointed and very worried because the prime minister doesn't discuss it with me. But second, I mean, doesn't he understand that when he's talking about ChatGPT, about economic policy, he's not talking to God or to an objective observer. He's talking to a highly biased system that has certain views about political economy. It could be neoliberal. Another model might be socialist. The best way to control politics today is to create one of these models, introduce some biases or guidance, and then release it into the wild, and it will spread like wildfire.
But then in order to be able to produce a model that will disseminate naturally, you need to be strong economically in the first place. So that is what we are observing these days. We can see China, they have their own models. We can see states, they have their own models. But actually, all the other countries, they also have their own models, but we don't use them. Do you use Mistral?
No.
I don't use Mistral either. Not because I think that it's bad model. I don't know. It never reached me as a person, as an individual user, because France doesn't have this power to scale its businesses in the same way Chinese or Americans have.
This is very worrisome because, Europe lost the race to the digital economy, to the internet economy. I've tried to look at the numbers. How much is the whole digital economy, digital services? How large is that economy in Europe? And it's something between 500 billion or 1 trillion a year. And this is something that we have lost entirely. We have handed it over to American companies. So certainly it's a source of power, enormous power, but it's also a source of prosperity. And for whatever reasons, some people in Europe think it's because we regulate too much. Other people in Europe think it's because we regulated too little and allowed American companies to enter. We can get into that discussion, but leaving it to the side now, we certainly lost that. But now the stakes are even higher because the AI economy the internet economy already penetrated everywhere. Google is everywhere, Amazon is everywhere. Amazon took over a lot of the of commerce, was replaced by e-commerce, trading goods. Google took over a lot of the advertising business. Facebook did as well. But with AI, these technologies are going to enter even other areas. They're going to enter into the healthcare industry. They're going to enter into consulting industry. They're going to enter into journalism for sure. When we have smart robots going to enter into industry, robots will be operating on the base of a large language model. And so we are now at risk, not of losing just a big chunk of our economies, but losing the entirety of our economies, because soon enough, AI and the economy will be synonyms. There will be hardly anything that doesn't work on the basis of these foundational models. Even law, law firms, when I talk to people working in big law firms, increasingly they don't hire anyone anymore to come into the business because AI is taking over. So are we going to use American models to power our economies entirely? Are we using Chinese models? I wish there was more awareness that this is the critical question today, because eventually our economies will just evaporate, being taken over by foundational infrastructure that is coming from elsewhere.
Well, I think that it's important, maybe you would agree, to understand why is it that American or Chinese models are winning, and why are they created in such an effective manner in the first place. It's maybe because the environment in the States or China incentivize creators, innovators to do things, to scale them up, to harness the profits out of them. I don't think our environment in Europe incentivizes people to be successful, to experiment, to take risks. I think that we have this, and this is a discussion actually probably more important than whether we should regulate more or less, is this underlying feeling, whether technology is something to be afraid of or something to be hopeful about in a rational manner, obviously, but hopeful about. I think that the feeling of fear is winning in Europe, and the other parts of the world, they don't have it to such an extent as we. So they are more bold in what they're doing. They take more risks, sometimes too much, but they're winning, we're losing. So maybe this mental attitude is also important.
This is a very important discussion to have. My ideas have changed a bit on this over the last 20 years. I used to believe more that the problem was, as you say, a problem of mentality, or sometimes a problem of excessive regulation. But now I think there's also another element, which is the geopolitical element. The fact that we don't think about the world in geopolitical terms has also hurt us. I remember 20 years ago when some of these companies were arriving in Europe, Facebook, Google, and so on. There was the idea that it was great. If they were American companies, that's great. Well, first of all, because we're such strong partners, there's never any conflict of interests. Second, these companies are not even American. This was a very common argument. These companies are led by profit motives and market motives. There's nothing American about them. What does it matter if they are headquartered in New York or California? They are just global companies, and we shouldn't have any problem with that. I think some of these ideas turned out to be quite naive. The wake-up moment, if it didn't happen before, should have happened a year and a half ago when Donald Trump was inaugurated. And there's a photo I always show in my lectures, because behind Donald Trump, on the third row, there's his cabinet. But in the row immediately behind him, there are the CEOs of the 5 largest technological companies: Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Sundar Pichai, and so on. So that's the moment when you realize, well, these companies clearly are American because they are there celebrating the inauguration of the American president. I didn't see them when Ursula von der Leyen was inaugurated. They were not there. And in fact, I always ask in my lectures, because I show a picture of Donald Trump with the 5 CEOs in his inauguration. I show a picture of Xi Jinping with the main CEOs of the digital tech giants in China. And then I ask my audience, can we find a picture of Ursula von der Leyen with the main CEOs of European tech giants? And there are 2 answers. First, no, because we don't like that. We like our businesses and our politics to be separate. And increasingly, I think this is a problem. I used to have more of a view that they should be kept completely separate. But in the age of advanced technology, when technology and geopolitics are converging into the same concept, this is no longer possible.
But the thing is, I was having this discussion in many contexts, and it always could be reduced into the observation that is like that. I totally get your point. So if everybody is doing it, we should be doing it as well, right? Well, what's the point of being idealistic if all people around us are not? We're gonna lose. They're gonna win.
But the point is not so much that that we should do it because everyone else is doing it.
Yeah, but let me finish it. But my take is like that. Okay, if everybody will follow this logic, what's the end point of this game? Let's think about it. The fragmented world that resembles the world from pre-capitalist era. Everybody fighting for its own piece of cake. Not so much additional value created. Actually, a world of conflict. What's the other option? If we stick to this idealistic perspective, and if we try to convince others to this, we at least, first of all, may slow down the world on its path to be on conflict, or maybe, just maybe, we can reverse the trends and we can go in the direction of the world that is actually cooperating. Well, it's possible because we've been there. We had globalization and we had its peak, and of course, it was not perfect, but it was going quite relatively well. So it's not unrealistic to expect the world to cooperate. So the question is, which path do we choose?
No, I agree that we, as Europeans, should try to shape the world of tomorrow according to our values or ideas. But the problem is, in order to do that, we first have to have the power to shape. So there are two things. First, acquiring the power to shape, and then how are we going to shape it? Or to put it differently, it's okay if we want to regulate technology, but first we have to develop it. The mistake we made was to think that we could regulate American and Chinese companies. That is not going to work. The problem is not that people in other parts of the world act differently and we have to follow them. The problem is that the reality itself, the reality of geopolitics and technology, does not allow for that. If we try to regulate an American, we could say, let the Americans develop this technology, we'll then regulate it. Turns out to be impossible, because the moment you try to regulate it, you have the American president himself coming forward and threatening to do this or that, exercising a lot of influence. You've seen, quite shocking, that under Donald Trump, there's even been a confusion between national security and business. You've seen J.D. Vance say publicly that if X is fined by the European Commission, we have to rethink NATO. But, this was never said publicly. But I have enough experience working in business, working in Brussels, to know that even though this was not said public, it happened. Usually what happened was that the representative of an American company would meet a commissioner and would say, we're such good partners, we're together in NATO, we've been allies for 70 years. This new regulation is really creating a lot of problems for us. This was the Biden way of doing it. The Trump way of doing it and the Vance way of doing it is to do it publicly in a very blunt way. But let's not think that this didn't exist before. And so
let me ask you a question, because you also have the practical experience working within European Union as the Secretary of State on behalf of Portugal. What steps would you take in order to change Europe's position from rule taker to rule maker?
Yes. So I think we need a balance between two sides of the debate. I still think liberals, in the Polish sense, in the European sense of liberal, classical liberal, Hayek and so on, I still think they have valuable points. And there is too much regulation. There's too much obstacles in intrastate digital trade in Europe. Goods, it works very well, but services doesn't work well. We need more single market, more integration. We need less regulations. I still think that's an important point. We need more integrated financial markets. We certainly need to channel, this is very important, channel European savings to the European economy. Europeans are very wealthy. They save a lot, but those savings don't go through pension funds and investment funds and banks. They go into American treasuries or the American stock market. Everyone knows this, but it's been so hard to change this structure. If European savings, went into the European economy by creating large investment funds, large private equity, large venture funds, venture capital funds that could then power European startups, everything would change. This has to be changed at the level. There's a lot of interest groups that are trying to stop changes in this area. But I also think, and this is where I've changed a little bit. In 2015, I was still much more interested in economic policy than geopolitics. The last 10 years, I've only writing about geopolitics. That changed my worldview quite a bit. And I think geopolitics is important. That means perhaps we need to use our political power to create space for European companies, even if that involves creating obstacles for American and Chinese companies.
Well, let me ask you this question as a final one. Isn't there a danger in your own argument that it's very often the case with nice theories that when they are taken by politicians and implemented in the reality, they get disrupted, they get simplified to the point of not resembling the original ones anymore. So aren't you afraid that the same thing could happen with you? Like, I say I'm the government. I hear you and I read your book. Amazing, a new Hegel.
Right.
It gives me the reason to do things, and I can show the book and see this is my theory, read the book. So that is why I'm doing this. That is why I'm nationalizing companies. That is why I'm giving those public contracts to my friends, because I'm building the power of my state, and you don't go in my way. So aren't you afraid that this maybe reasonable approach that you are presenting is going to end up as a legitimacy for cronyism?
I'm still focused on trying to get politicians to follow my ideas. Then I'll worry about that later. Just joking. But no, I think you're right about that. But I think the problem now is that we have other ideas that are being used for terrible purposes. And we have to fight those ideas. I actually tried to develop a framework that would be quite flexible, because again, I'm talking about this almost like a meta theory. I'm talking about how different projects of world building, on the one way they fight, but they can also be articulated. In my ideal vision, different world builders would come to a balance where they work together to shape the world of tomorrow, and some have more influence. It's almost like having different computer programmers working on the same video game, and some will design the basic architecture, while others will design detail, even the basic architecture that could be a division of labor. So I think I'm aware of the problems you describe, and in this book and in the future books that I'm working on now, I'm trying to reach a meta theory that can integrate different theories. This is always difficult to do, but that's my idea. But I'm still a big believer in the classical liberal ideas, but we have to be realistic and also realize that some of them were also misappropriated and misused. And you say, this is my book, this is what we believe in, is the famous sentence that Margaret Thatcher said about Hayek, right? She grabbed a copy of, I think, Constitution of Liberty, maybe, in a cabinet minister meeting in the UK, and she said, this is what we believe in. And I think some of these ideas, I just gave you one example that I think is a powerful one. When European decision makers said it doesn't matter if the companies are American or European, companies operate in the market, they have no nationality. Some of those things Hayek might have said as well, but they turned out not to be entirely correct. Companies do have a nationality because they are subject to political power. And the lesson of the last 2 years with Donald Trump is that very few American companies were able to say, I don't listen to the American president. I'm not into politics. I'm doing business here. I won't follow instructions. They are very vulnerable, actually. I think the left is wrong when they say that companies are in charge. This is not the experience of the last 2 years. Companies are very vulnerable to political power, but that's
Companies
another.
still do not wield the monopoly of power. This is it. It's still states' privilege to use force, and
of course.
And that is, in the end of the day, the most important thing I would say.
And that this reinforces the point that liberals make, but it also introduces a new element that I'm basically saying we need to have our own tech giants because even if we want them to be independent of power, they can only be independent of power if they're European. Because in America and in China, it's very clear that they are not going to be independent from power. So what I'm saying, and I think Hayek could agree, is that if you want to create a liberal society, you also need to build it. Because in Hayek, sometimes in some books, he seems to be saying that it emerges naturally. But in other books, he seems to be saying it operates naturally, but it doesn't emerge naturally. Yeah. So it needs to be created by us.
His books are inconsistent because his thought was ever evolving. So actually, and that is consistent with his worldview, that it all is an effect of evolution. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the book. Come to Poland, visit us here. But now enjoy Portugal weather.
Yeah, absolutely. Going to the beach today. Well, it was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. And I think we gave a very good and comprehensive overview of the book. I hope the readers like it and see you in Poland.
See you. Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Szanowni Państwo, jeśli dobrnęliście już aż do tego momentu rozmowy, czyli do końca, to zachęcam jeszcze do zasubskrybowania, zalajkowania, skomentowania tego filmu i podzielenia się nim ze znajomymi.